Did you know that the never-ending rivalry and tensions between the US and Russia developed during the aftermath of World War II and intensified during the Cold War? It's true that the Cold War wasn't fought face-to-face with arms and tanks, but its effects still echo in our present. From the Yalta Conference to the Truman Doctrine, from the Berlin Blockade to the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the eventual fall of the Soviet Union. In this video, we will take you on an express journey through the last 100 years and tell you all about this important world event. This is the story of the Cold War. As the dust settled after the surrender of Nazi Germany in May 1945 at the end of World War II, the world emerged from the shadows of conflict but found itself at a crossroads, torn between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The victorious allies of World War II, led by the US, the Soviet Union, and the UK, faced the colossal task of rebuilding war-ravaged nations. However, as they celebrated their common victory, underlying ideological differences, especially between the democratic West and communist East, began to surface. The Yalta Conference, held in February 1945, brought together three major Allied leaders of World War II: Franklin D. Roosevelt of the US, Winston Churchill of the UK, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. Set in the Crimean resort town of Yalta, the conference aimed to address critical post-war issues and plan the reconstruction of war-torn Europe. The primary purpose of the conference was to discuss the division of Germany and its post-war fate. The Allied leaders deliberated over the establishment of 4 occupation zones in Germany, with each major power, like the US, the UK, the Soviet Union, and eventually France, administering a sector. These zones later became the West and East German states. You see, after the war, there were concerns about the political direction of Eastern Europe and the possibility of Soviet-backed communist parties gaining power in Western European democracies. The Soviets wanted to keep control of Eastern Europe because they were afraid Germany might become a threat again. They also wanted communism to spread worldwide because of their ideological beliefs. Communism, in simple terms, is a society without social classes, a state-controlled environment where the community owns the means of production and there's equal distribution of resources and wealth, while the Western democracy's values centered on private ownership, individual liberties, and free market capitalism. The fear was that communism might restrict personal freedoms and lead to an authoritarian government. The Cold War rivalry intensified these concerns, as the United States and its allies aimed to counter the influence of the Soviet Union and prevent the global spread of communism. The Yalta Conference also resulted in the groundwork being done for the establishment of the United Nations, or UN, as a global organization to promote international cooperation and prevent future conflicts. But let's not get into more details about the UN. Now, Germany was split into zones, and in 1946, the British Prime Minister at that time, Winston Churchill, famously spoke of an Iron Curtain descending across Europe, symbolizing the growing divide between the democratic West and the communist East. This metaphor highlighted the ideological and political separation and the restrictions on communication and movement between the two sides. The same year, US President Harry S. Truman declared the Truman Doctrine. This was a significant shift in American foreign policy. We know how the Western powers were totally against the communist regime and feared Soviet domination in Eastern Europe. So, this doctrine was all about containing its spread to Europe. The US even committed to support nations resisting this communist influence by providing economic and military aid under something called the Marshall Plan, named after the US Secretary of State, George C. Marshall. Did you know the term Cold War was first used by an English writer, George Orwell, in an article published in 1945? After the Truman Doctrine, the Cold War really intensified with a series of significant events that shaped the geopolitical landscape. Before we continue, please hit the like button if you are enjoying this video so far, and subscribe to our channel to help us grow. Thank you. Now let's continue. When Germany was divided into zones, the city of Berlin, which was situated deep within the Soviet-controlled zone of East Germany, was itself divided into 4 sectors. This made the city a center for all the tensions, and the Soviet Union created the Berlin Blockade in 1948. It was a strategic attempt to isolate West Berlin from the Western Allies and push them out. The Soviets blocked all land and river access between West Berlin and West Germany. This blockade caused 2.5 million civilians in the western sectors of Berlin to face severe hardships and a cutoff from access to basic needs, like electricity, food, fuel, and other crucial supplies. To handle this situation, the Allies organized the daily Berlin Airlift to support West Berlin with the essentials and show their commitment to the city's freedom from Stalin's pressures. The airlift lasted from June 1948 to September 1949, when the blockade was finally lifted, and flew more than 1,500 flights that carried 4,500 tons of cargo comprising of milk, flour, and medical supplies. The growing tensions now made way for the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, in 1949. It was basically a team of countries united to help each other if any of them got attacked by the Soviets. The formation of NATO was obviously a major threat to the Soviets. So, what did they do? They created the Warsaw Pact in 1955, which consisted of the Soviet Union and 7 other Soviet satellite states in Central and Eastern Europe. While NATO did not engage in a large-scale military conflict with the Warsaw Pact, it always resisted Soviet aggression in Europe. And let's not forget that the US was enjoying a worldwide monopoly on the atomic bomb after its successful explosion in 1945 in Los Alamos, New Mexico. But this didn't last very long, and the Soviets entered the atomic club after their atomic warhead explosion in 1949. We have a video on the father of the atomic bomb, Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, on our channel, so do watch it after this one. It's a fact that the creation of new and more deadly weapons does not always promise peace. This is exactly what happened next. In 1949, the Chinese Communists, led by Mao Zedong, emerged victorious in the Chinese Civil War, establishing the People's Republic of China on the mainland. This marked a significant shift in the global balance of power, as the new government aligned with the Soviet Union and adopted a communist ideology. So, in 1950, the Korean War erupted when North Korean forces, supported by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea. The North, led by the communist dictator Kim Il-sung, who was the grandfather of the current leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, sought to unify Korea under communist rule, while the South, supported by the United States and other Western nations, aimed to preserve democracy. So, despite the two sides of the Cold War never fighting face-to-face, the Korean War became a battleground for them. The UN, led by the US, stepped in to help South Korea. But, as with any other war, it was bloody, indecisive, and ended in 1953 after claiming about 5 million lives of both soldiers and civilians. It was also the year when Joseph Stalin died, and the tensions somewhat relaxed. If you come to think of it, the distance between the two sides had always been pretty big. But in 1962, the United States discovered that the Soviet Union had secretly deployed nuclear missiles in Cuba, which is less than 90 miles from mainland US. Now this was a very solid threat of a nuclear war, and things got pretty heated. The US President, John F. Kennedy, demanded the removal of the missiles by imposing a naval blockade around Cuba. This led to a tense standoff. After intense negotiations, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev agreed to withdraw the missiles in exchange for a US pledge not to invade Cuba. Now, after Stalin, In the late 1980s, the Cold War started to crumble under the leaderships of the new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. He took steps to dismantle the strict aspects of the Soviet system and work towards making the political system more democratic. The communist regimes in Eastern Europe collapsed in 1989 to 1990, and Gorbachev allowed these changes to happen without interference. Democratic governments replaced the communist ones in East Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. West and East Germany unified under NATO, with the approval of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev's reforms weakened the Communist Party, leading to power shifts in Russia and other Soviet republics. And finally, by late 1991, the last blow came as the resignation of Gorbachev and the Soviet Union collapsed, giving rise to 5 independent nations, including a democratic Russia. With this, the Cold War came to an end. Isn't it so bizarre that the world has seen so much war and destruction, yet still today, there isn't peace everywhere? Tell us your thoughts in the comments section. Visit our channel for more interesting content like the Cold War secret spy gadgets, and we'll see you soon in another video.